Hansel and Gretel. At the edge of a great forest stood a small cottage. In it lived two children, a boy, Hansel, and his sister Gretel. Their father, a poor woodcutter, loved them dearly. Their stepmother, however, was mean and miserable and hated the children with a passion. One evening their father opened the cupboard and found almost nothing left to eat.
This won't feed four. How can we live?
The stepmother saw the chance she'd been waiting for. Give the children some bread, take them into the forest and leave them there.
But they'll die.
Better the two of them than all four of us. And though the woodcutter loved his children dearly, he could see no other way. In their bed, Hansel and Gretel heard their stepmother's wicked plan. Gretel began to cry, but Hansel dried her tears and said, "Don't worry, sister. I have a plan too." Later that night, he crept outside and filled his pockets with white pebbles that shone like silver in the moonlight. Next day, as they followed their father into the forest, Hansel quietly dropped the pebbles onto the path. When they stopped to rest, the woodcutter told his children to stay by the fire while he went to chop wood. The children ate their piece of bread and waited, but their father didn't return for them. They fell asleep, and when they awoke it was night. Feeling frightened, Gretel asked, "How will we get home?" Her brother hushed her and told her to wait for the moon to rise. Sure enough, when the moon came out, the white pebbles Hansel had dropped shone like silver and led the children safely back home. Their delighted father hugged them tightly, but their stepmother was furious. A few weeks later, the cupboards were bare once more. The stepmother again urged the woodcutter to take his children back into the forest and leave them there. That night, with a wicked smile on her face, the stepmother locked the doors so Hansel couldn't collect the white pebbles that had led them home before. "No one's coming back this time." The next day, the two children dutifully followed their father into the forest. Now it was Hansel's turn to despair. "Without pebbles, we'll never find our way home." But Gretel whispered in her brother's ear, "It's all right. This time I have a plan." And she started to crumble their only piece of bread onto the path as they walked deeper into the forest than they had ever walked before. That night, they again waited by the fire for their father, but again he didn't return. Next morning, they went to find the breadcrumbs that would lead them home. To their dismay, they found no sign of them. The forest birds had eaten every single one. For 3 days, Hansel and Gretel walked deeper into the forest trying to find their way home. Hungry and tired, they suddenly stumbled into a clearing where they saw the most wonderful sight. A house made of gingerbread. Roofed with cakes and with windows of spun sugar, the starving children couldn't wait to eat it. Gretel nibbled at the window while Hansel reached up and broke a piece off the roof. Just then, a voice called out, "Nibble, nibble like a mouse. Who is nibbling at my house?" The door opened and an old woman appeared. She smilingly beckoned them inside. There, the most delicious meal lay on the table. But as soon as the children entered the house, the old woman slammed the door and cackled gleefully. The horrified children soon realized the truth. The old woman was really a witch, and she was planning to make a meal out of them. The witch locked Hansel in a cage. She sent Gretel into the kitchen and made her cook for her brother so he would be fat enough for the witch to eat. Every morning the witch would hobble over to the cage and cry, "Boy, put out your finger so I can feel if you're getting fat." As the witch could hardly see, Hansel tricked her by holding out an old chicken bone. "You're a bag of bones, boy! Eat more! Eat fast! Eat now!" After several days, the witch was starving and could wait no longer. She opened the oven door to see if it was hot enough. Quickly, Gretel pushed the witch with all her might, sending her head first into the oven. Then she slammed the door. Gretel hurried to the cage and set Hansel free. Then the children gathered up the old witch's precious stones and pearls and sprinted through the woods as fast as their little legs could carry them. Luckily, the path they followed led them home, where their dear father was overjoyed to see them. Even better, their evil stepmother had left the house and would never return again. The delighted children laughed and clapped, and then Gretel shook out her apron. The woodcutter couldn't believe his eyes. From that day on, Hansel and Gretel lived happily with their father, and they never went hungry again. The Flying Head. Many years ago, a brave young woman called Orenda lived with her people in a land of beautiful forests and valleys. The soil was rich and allowed them to grow many crops, so you'd expect there'd always be plenty to eat. But in the mountains nearby, there was a deep cave, and once the sun went down, a terrible monster would emerge. The creature was the Flying Head, a massive head with flaming eyes and huge fangs, but no body whatsoever. Gigantic wings sprouted from each side of the head so it could swoop down when it hunted. And it hunted often because the Flying Head was always hungry. It roared and snarled so loudly the trees and the teepees trembled. Orenda watched the bravest fighters attack the Flying Head. They fired arrows and threw spears at it, but its skin was so thick and leathery that arrowheads just bounced off. Orenda helped her people sew together all the fishing nets to make one net big enough to catch the creature. The people hid in the trees and waited. The Flying Head flew low over the teepees, sniffing out food to eat. At the signal, "Now!" they flung the net out over the monster. But the Flying Head soared up and into the sky and tore the fishing net apart with its sharp fangs. The villagers tried hiding their food between rocks in the creeks or under wood piles, but the Flying Head would always find and devour it. Soon the villagers were starving. In desperation, they decided to offer up the last of their food, hoping the creature would eat its fill and leave them in peace. They left piles of food around the teepees, and then everyone, men, women and children, ran into the woods to hide. As night fell, the villagers watched the Flying Head swoop over the treetops. It quickly ate all the food that had been left out, but it was still hungry. It roared around the teepees, angrily searching for more. In the forest, the people shook with fear. Would the Flying Head eat them next? Orenda decided something had to be done. She crept to her teepee and sneaked inside. There she built up the fire and then put 10 small rocks over the flames. She pretended the rocks were pieces of meat she was cooking. She sprinkled fresh herbs and spices over the stones until a succulent aroma wafted out of the teepee. The instant the Flying Head sniffed that delicious smell, it groaned with hunger. It followed the scent until it reached the teepee of the brave young woman. With its eyes glowing red, it peered inside. Orenda knew the Flying Head was close by, but she pretended not to see it. She calmly continued cooking, adding more spices and turning the rocks carefully as if they were tender pieces of juicy meat. By now the Flying Head was licking its massive lips and drooling with hunger. The woman picked up one of the rocks with a pair of tongs and blew on it. "I must taste one of these and see if they're ready to eat." She lifted the rock to her mouth and pretended to bite it, but really she dropped the sizzling hot rock onto the floor beside her. This is surely the most delicious meal I've ever cooked." Watching through the flaps of the teepee, the Flying Head was driven mad with hunger. As the young woman lifted another rock to her mouth, the greedy creature crashed its way inside. Quickly, the young woman stepped away from the fire. The monster's eyes glowed with desire as it looked at the rocks. It opened its massive jaws, sucked all the scorching hot rocks into its mouth, and swallowed them whole. Instantly, the Flying Head felt a horrible sensation and let out a terrible cry. Then it streaked out of the teepee and away from the village. Its shrieks of pain could be heard across the mountains, and the whole earth shook with the sound. From that day on, the monster was never seen again. The joyful villagers returned to the fields and grew their crops, grateful they'd have food to eat once more. Most of all, though, they were grateful to Orenda, the clever and brave young woman who had rid them forever of the terrible Flying Head.
The Greedy Merchant. Long ago, in China,
There was a kind and honest farmer who worked hard in the rice fields every day. He was very poor, but he still shared what little he had with everyone in the village. In the same village lived a sneaky and greedy merchant who was always tricking the villagers to pay more money for the bags of tea and salt that he sold them. One evening, just as the moon was rising, the farmer was walking along the riverbank. He came upon a wounded bird, its tiny body panting with pain. The farmer gently picked it up and stroked its feathers. The merchant happened to be watching this. He shook his head.
Why waste your time on that useless, half-dead creature?
But the farmer took the bird home. There he made a splint for its broken wing. Every day he fed the injured bird and talked to it sweetly. When the wing was healed and the tiny creature was strong again, the farmer carried it outside. He was sad to say goodbye to the bird, but he knew that all creatures needed their freedom.
Off you go, my little friend. Fly home.
Then, to the farmer's amazement, the bird spoke.
Thank you for being so kind and asking for nothing in return. Let me reward you.
The bird flew up into its nest and picked up a pumpkin seed. He gave it to the farmer.
Plant this seed and you will never want for anything again.
So the farmer planted the pumpkin seed, and it grew quickly into a sturdy vine covered in huge, ripe pumpkins. The farmer split open one of the pumpkins to discover it was filled with gold. He was thrilled and split open more pumpkins to find even more gold. He dashed around the village to share his good fortune, offering handfuls of gold to all his neighbors. The merchant laughed when he saw the farmer giving away his riches.
Whoa, what a fool!
And he laughed even louder when he heard where the gold had come from. He thought the farmer was making up a crazy story. But when the greedy merchant inspected the pumpkin vine, he shook with envy.
I should have golden pumpkins too!
The merchant hurried down to the riverbank, where the birds were perched in the trees. He took a slingshot and fired sharp stones into the branches until, whack, he hit one of the tiny birds. He picked up the helpless creature and carried it home. He offered the wounded bird a deal.
I'll nurse you back to health. In return, you must give me an even bigger pumpkin seed than the one given to that silly farmer.
The merchant did indeed look after the bird while the broken wing mended, but there was no kindness in his words. When the bird was strong again, the merchant took it out into the garden and set it free.
Don't forget my golden pumpkins, Mr. Bird.
The bird spoke to him.
Wait here. You will get your just reward.
The bird flew up into its nest and brought back a pumpkin seed even bigger than the farmer's seed. The greedy merchant quickly planted the seed. He paced impatiently up and down the garden all night, watching the vine grow by the light of the moon. The vine grew thick and strong, but there were no pumpkins yet. Instead, the amazing plant grew straight up into the air, higher than a tree, until it disappeared far into the clouds and out of sight. The merchant guessed that the pumpkins filled with gold must be growing at the top of the vine. As he didn't want to share the treasure with anyone else, he decided he should act quickly and secretively. He slung a huge bag on his back to fill with gold and began to climb the mighty vine. He climbed up and up all the way through the clouds. But no matter how high he climbed, he saw no sign of any pumpkins, golden or not. Eventually, the merchant had climbed so high above the earth, he was standing on the moon. He searched the moon, but there were no pumpkins there either. The merchant was angry.
That useless bird cheated me!
Then he looked down and saw that the vine was shriveling up. He ran back, but the vine had completely vanished. There was no way to get back down to the earth, and no one in the village knew where the merchant had gone. So he was trapped on the moon forever. Sometimes, when you look up into the night sky, there seems to be a man on the moon. Many believe it's the face of that greedy merchant, still trapped up there, and wondering how he'll ever get back down. Lazy Jack. A long time ago, a boy named Jack lived with his poor mother. Their tiny yard was always filled with other people's washing, which Jack's mother did to earn a few coins. While his mother slaved, Jack liked to sit in the sun, not just in the morning over a mug of tea, but all day long. If the moon had been any warmer, he would have sat all night as well. One day, Jack's mother had had enough.
Get up, lazy Jack. Go and earn your keep, or it's no more stew for you.
So Jack went looking for a job. He didn't have to go far. A farmer put him to work hoeing the fields for a day. When he was done, Jack was paid a penny. Clutching his wages, Jack headed for home, looking forward to a few hours sitting around doing nothing. But as he crossed the stream, Jack dropped his penny. It was gone. Jack's mother wasn't pleased.
Stupid boy. You should have put the coin in your pocket.
That struck Jack as a good idea. I'll do so tomorrow. Next morning, Jack was lucky again. He worked for another farmer, and at the end of the day was rewarded with a jug of milk. Remembering his mother's advice, Jack jammed the milk jug into his pocket and set off at a jog. Jack jogged along with the milk cascading here and there, but mostly down Jack's trousers.
Idiot child.
Jack's mother flung the empty jug away.
Next time, carry it in your arms, carefully.
Of course. Next time. Jack wanted to please his mother. He worked extra hard the following day at the woodworkers. His pay was an old carved chair. Jack had his instructions. He clutched the chair carefully in his arms and turned to go. All went well for nearly 5 seconds. Jack tumbled all the way down with the chair breaking into a million pieces to cushion his fall. Jack's mother patched him up.
Numbskull, you should have used a rope and tied that chair to your back.
Next day, Jack worked even harder for another farmer, who rewarded the boy with a donkey. Jack stared at the animal, sure he could get it right this time. The donkey looked a bit heavy, but Jack was determined. He pulled a rope from his pocket. And so Jack set off for home very slowly. The donkey, surprised to find itself upside down on the back of a human, decided to go along with it and see what happened. Jack staggered on. His legs were strong, and the donkey was having a nice time, but Jack realized a shortcut was needed. He pushed through a hedge and across a park, past the fine house of a rich nobleman. Staring out of the window was the nobleman's daughter, Sophia, who was lovely but very sad. She'd been sad for a long time. No one could remember her laughing, and the servants argued over how many years it had been since Sophia had even smirked. In despair, the rich nobleman had decreed that whoever could make his daughter laugh would earn Sophia's hand in marriage. Many suitors had tried. There was a prince who pulled funny faces. Next, a duke who bounced up and down on his head. Next, and an earl who could touch his ears with his tongue. Next. But the lovely Sophia was bored by them all. She sighed and looked out the window again, just as a strange boy wobbled past, knees buckling under the weight of a great donkey balanced on his back, hooves in the air. Sophia stared, and then a smile began at the edge of her mouth, and spread, and grew, and suddenly Sophia chuckled, and snorted, and then laughed. The rich nobleman's eyes lit up and then filled with tears. So happy was he to see his daughter laughing at last. Needless to say, the nobleman was as good as his word. Lazy Jack and the lovely Sophia were indeed married. They lived in the nobleman's house, and Jack's mother moved in as well, without the washing. Their lives were perfect, and best of all, Jack could sit in the sun with a mug of tea and do what he loved doing most. Absolutely nothing.